population of the 13 colonies grew rapidly, reaching 1.5 million settlers by the mid-18th century. Meanwhile, American industry was flourishing. In particular, American industrialists succeeded in ships building, which allowed them to quickly establish trade with the West Indies and thus find a market for their products. Uninterested in the growth of American industry and burdened with debt from the Seven-Year War, Britain began to increase taxes on the colonies. In 1775, all royal officials were expelled from 13 colonies. The king declared the colonists to be rebels, and a war of independence began. For a number of reasons, primarily financial hardship. In 1883, Britain signed a peace treaty, recognizing the independence of the 13 American colonies. The British concentrated on India, where they used their East India Company to seize control of trade routes and increase their influence in the region. The company made treaties with local rulers, offering protection in exchange for political subjugation and economic benefits if necessary, waged wars against the local kingdoms, taking advantage of their military technology and tactics. The Indian colonies significantly impacted the British economy. Britain was able to export vast quantities of Indian goods in Europe for a great profit and sell its own products to the colonies. This profit was the main funder of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. From the beginning of the 17th century, Britain tried to establish direct trade with China, but all efforts were in vain. China was a closed country that looked with contempt on foreigners. In 1715, the East India Company opened first British trading post in Canton. With British merchants in control of India's foreign trade, a three-way exchange developed. The tea Britain bought in China was paid for by India's exports of opium and cotton to China. And because of a rapidly increasing demand for tea in England, British merchants actively fostered the profitable exports of opium and cotton from India. Chinese authorities completely banned the opium trade, what consequently launched Opium Wars. After winning both wars, Britain gained free access to the Chinese market, free trade in opium and Hong Kong Island. According to various estimates, British profits from the sale of opium during 1830 to 1860 may have exceeded 400 million Spanish dollars. Colonial possessions, as well as superiority at sea and control of trade routes, contributed to the emergence of a wealthy class. Rich entrepreneurs and the money made from the colonies gave rise to the Industrial Revolution. From the 1870s, textile mills began to spring up all over Britain. The surplus of coal on the island encouraged the introduction of the steam engine. the steam revolution began. The great need for coal gave a big boost to metallurgy, engineering, and transportation. In 1830, the world's first railroad was built between Liverpool and Manchester. By the middle of the 19th century, Britain was producing 50% of the world's manufactured goods. The main exports were wool and cotton fabrics, machinery, iron, steel, ships, steam locomotives, and steam engines. Coal mining and iron smelting exceeded 50% of world level. The British merchant fleet was 60% of the world's, and the naval fleet was the largest. London, the largest city in the world, has become the world's financial center. By 1850, it was the #1 country in the world. Western powers, driven by a lack of resources and markets, began the scramble for Africa. Britain was no exception. By 1900, the British Empire had an area of 33 million square and a population of about 300 million people. What was the largest empire in history? The key factors that contributed to this British dominance were the colonial race leadership, trade and control of trade routes, industrial pioneering, innovations and technological supremacy, sea supremacy. Around the 1890s, Britain began to lose world dominance, but that's another story.